Instead of a creed, Unitarian Universalists share a spirit and vision of radical inclusivity, individual agency, and social justice. We create a safe space to stand out, stand up, and change your mind, particularly during life's transitions. We embrace personal discovery and growth through learning, engagement, and service. Our only doctrine is love.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Maria, gratia plena, Maria, gratia plena, Ave, Ave Dominus, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Ave Maria.
A reading from Hebrew Scripture, the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verses 16 to 24. And Yahweh said to the woman, "Because you listened to the serpent and ate from the tree of knowledge, I will greatly increase your pangs during childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, and yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." And to the man he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree, about which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return." The man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. And Yahweh made garments of skins for the man and his wife and clothed them. Then Yahweh said, "See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and now he might reach out his hand to take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Then Yahweh sent them forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which they were taken. He drove them out, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, at the gate, he placed the cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way back to the tree of life.
Please recite with me our shared affirmation of mission. This fellowship is a welcoming, diverse, and nurturing beloved community that promotes progressive religious thought and practice to create a more loving, just, and sustainable world.
We call this light before us in hope that we may always remain a strong community. May we know we are loved. May we share the love we have, and may we be the love we wish to see.
Do you know of loneliness when the burden of apples is so great the branches split and red drips into green grass? In Eden there was no serpent, though Adam pushed my body away, helpmeet once, witness to a husband sleeping. I know all, children, Cain and Abel alike. Come to my breast, and I am punished for knowledge of disease or discovery, of soft sucking mouths and pain threatens to shackle legs to earth. But my belly swells, the moon rises, Genesis full. Cursed, he swore. I say, I am Eve. Be aware, I am your mother.
My sermon today is entitled Three Faces of Eve. One of my Harvard Divinity School classmates had a wonderfully wacky and witty collection of t-shirts. They amused, offended, and sometimes perplexed us. One of my absolute favorites depicted a cartoon of Adam and Eve sitting under the tree of knowledge. The serpent is seen slinking down a trunk. Eve, apple in hand, muses, I can't help thinking there's a book in this. Adam looks like a deer caught in the proverbial headlights. No doubt about it, as myths go, the saga of Adam and Eve is a gripping read. There's a very compelling book in it, indeed. Suspense, intrigue, subterfuge, betrayal, complex characters, slinky creatures, and yes, sex. At the center of this action, we find the great creator God, Yahweh, and his human experiments sashaying their way through the Garden of Eden, blissfully and unabashedly naked, not to mention clueless. Mind you, they both ate the forbidden fruit, so I wonder why Adam comes off smelling so much sweeter through history. Here's my sermon summary in a nutshell. Eve deserves better. She was robbed. This morning, I'm asking you to take a closer look with me at three distinct and interconnected faces of civilization's first acknowledged female. They are the face of the temptress, the face of the wise woman goddess, and the face of the homemaker and mother. I believe each of these faces offers us something valuable about women, even if we need to strip off the film of misinterpretation, blame, and shame to find it. First of all, most liberal biblical scholars consider everything in the Bible prior to Genesis 12, which is the beginning of the story of Abraham and the history of a people, to a form of prehistoric mythology, which is not necessarily a disparaging or dismissive view. Myths were created to explain the world and offer us some truths about the human condition. Some scholars suspect that Hebrew scripture borrowed the Adam and Eve story from a Sumerian creation myth involving, you guessed it, a garden, a snake, a man, and a woman. Goddess stories explain the origins of love and wisdom in the figures of Aphrodite and Sophia. Bible literalists prefer the word parable, a lesson in morality, though that's not really a great way to describe the first couple's escapades in Eden. The myth of Eve is complex, as it defies easy conclusions. Even if the majority of us reject the Eve stereotypes, she continues to bear the brunt for Adam's error. And by extension, women to this day are left holding the sin bag for all humanity. And we're to blame for the pain of childbirth and dinnertime bickering and goodness knows what else. What I want to know is this. If women are so powerful, so responsible for everything, why aren't we in charge of everything? Probably the most common face of Eve is the visage of the evil temptress. I was fascinated to discover that sin is never explicitly mentioned in the excerpt from Genesis I read to you earlier. That was a later Christian addition. In fact, the sin of Eve and the fall of Adam lay the groundwork for the entire Christian doctrine of original sin and ultimate salvation in Christ, the second Adam, as he's known. This original sin theology was elaborated and emphasized by the early church fathers. Augustine in the 4th century, and he's still a popular resource in 2021 for homophobic, transphobic, and misogynist screeds. In her insightful book, Adam and Eve and the Serpent, the feminist scholar Elaine Pagels underscores the usefulness of this concept of temptation and original sin for justifying the church's authoritarian control over ordinary people and their bodies, particularly females. She asks, after all, how could you trust folks who were innately evil and depraved to know how to behave or govern themselves? They needed higher authorities, male authorities, to tell them what to do and how to do it. In particular, Tertullian, an early church father, wrote with considerable vitriol about the evils of women. To him, women, and Eve above all others, represented sensuality and the flesh, and thus became a timeless poster girl for sinners who celebrate the body and or question divine authority or male authority. And do you not know that you are Eve? Asks Tertullian. The sentence of God on this sex of yours lives in this age. Her guilt must by necessity live. You are the devil's gateway, he wrote, the first deserter of the divine law. You are she who persuaded him whom the devil was not valiant enough to attack. You destroyed so easily God's image, man. Thanks to Tertullian and his cronies, beginning in the 1st century, thousands of women have been burned, stoned, drowned, and disowned for supposedly going against prevailing male-dominated Western religious doctrine. I suppose I'd ask Tertullian if he was willing to address so lowly a creature as myself, and if he hadn't fainted or croaked from the sight of a creedless she-clergy, why Adam isn't somehow responsible for his own choices. Was he so henpecked? Was he so weak? Why does Adam deserve or warrant such protection and grace? My colleague, the Reverend Sharon Dittmar, answers this query. She argues in a sermon that the bottom line is our attempt to protect Adam and to protect ourselves from death. She writes that although Genesis 3 is the mother of all sin stories, it is really a story about sexuality and mortality. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is really a tree of sexual wisdom and awareness. Just like girls today, Eve matures first, and she is the curious one, a bit more with it. She is the philosopher to Adam's frat boy. Some call Eve the first rabbi, and Adam the first redneck, although this is a bit harsh in my view. Eve doesn't deserve to be bashed, but neither does Adam. In actuality, Eve may have more in common with one of the so-called creatures in the Garden of Eden than she does with Adam. This is where Eve's second and less acknowledged face as a wise woman goddess and as a merged symbol of sensuality, nature, and spirituality emerges. Did you know that the serpent is an ancient and widely revered symbol of female divinity and was often the consort of the earth goddess? Perhaps you're familiar with the very famous image of St. Francis beating the snakes out of Ireland. Well, this image, what it's depicting, is the expunging of Celtic paganism with its reverence for goddesses and nature in the 4th century, and in its place, the establishment of Christianity with its patriarchal male god and its view of man as rational and women as depraved. They even built Christian churches on top of sacred sites like that of St. Bridget. The body for them becomes a vehicle of shame. You can conjure up any classical painting of Adam and Eve after the proverbial fall, and they are hunched over and they are grasping at fig leaves to cover their sensuality. It's tricky for fundamentalists in particular to make the leap from Eve as corrupter to Eve as sensual wisdom goddess. Our society and religious culture remains steeped in a brew of sexism and patriarchy that has simmered for centuries. Strong, sensual women take the hit. There's something suspect about them unless they fit a stereotype and stick with it. Barbie girl, tomboy, sex kitten, power player, housefrau. You'd think we would be over this nonsense by now, especially in an age when defining a woman has become so much more complex and nuanced. Cisgender, trans, genderqueer, gender fluid, woman spelled with a Y instead of an A, to name just a few. But the nonsense runs so deep. During the most recent flap over insurance coverage for contraception and support for Planned Parenthood, the New York Times ran a photo of a baby boomer woman holding a sign that read, "I can't believe we are still protesting this," expletive deleted. Then you may remember all the news coverage of Hillary Clinton's hair, her makeup, and her footwear choices back when she was Secretary of State. Secretary of State. Hillary plays with the big boys, and for most of her amazing career, she survived by cutting off her metaphorical femininity, her hair. You may disagree, but I sense that Hillary has had little latitude to display a face of sensuality or softness. And then she makes the front page as she is chided for going makeup-free, growing her hair, ditching her contact lenses, or going barefoot. Here's her response. I feel so relieved to be at the stage in my life right now because, if I want to wear glasses, I'll wear glasses. If I want to pull my hair back, I'll pull it back. At some point, it's just not something that deserves a lot of time and attention. And if others want to worry about it, I'll let them worry about it for a change. In other words, she earned this freedom by rising to the top in a man's world. But it took decades. Hillary was able and most willing to display her maternal instincts. It may be entirely voluntary, but some women feel compelled to toss a shroud over the third face of Eve, that of mother, nurturer, and/or partner. Others may feel that that's the only face they're empowered to wear, while increasingly contemporary women can and do choose to forgo motherhood entirely without being pitied or shunned. I don't know how old you are watching this, but you might remember a perfume commercial for something called Angelou, in which the quintessential 1980s power babe brings home the bacon, fries it up in the pan, and never lets her guy forget he's a man. If you've never seen it, I bet it's on YouTube. The only thing missing is she burps the baby and waxes the floor. The advertising industry must have picked up on the angst women felt, and they hit the mark. She had to do everything. I found a funny joke that makes a valuable point about what we do and do not expect from women, beginning with Eve. In it, Adam was walking around the Garden of Eden feeling very lonely, so God asked him, "What's wrong with you?" Adam said he didn't have anyone to talk to, and God said he was going to make him a companion, and it would be a woman. Adam doesn't know what a woman is, so God explains. This person will cook for you and wash your clothes. She will always agree with every decision you make. She will bear your children and never ask you to get up in the middle of the night to take care of them. She will not nag you and will always be the first to admit she was wrong when you have a disagreement. She will never have a headache and will freely give you love and compassion whenever you need it. Adam asked, "Well, what would a woman like that cost me?" God said, "An arm and a leg." Adam said, "Well, what can I get for just a rib?" And the rest is history. Well, maybe not so fast. Have you ever heard of Lilith? She is Adam's mythical first wife from Jewish legend. Apparently, she was created as Adam's equal simultaneously from the same dust, and she took their equality literally. She wouldn't defer to him, and when God tried to play marriage counselor, Lilith wouldn't defer to him either. As a result, she was banished, turned back to dust, and Eve was created. So Eve isn't Lilith. She isn't an equal. She's a slightly more obedient helpmate, but she still isn't the Angelou woman or Yahweh's description of the ideal dame. Better than that, I reckon, she represents a more balanced female, a cisgender one, it's worth noting, the merger of spirit, mind, and flesh, creating life. Significantly, Eve is only given her name, which means life-bearer, after they are expelled from the Garden of Eden. Eve can now usher in life as well as death. She has the power of the blood, and as a symbol of womanhood, she bears the brunt for our finitude. In the peculiar vision of church fathers, Eve must have tricked Adam, must have seduced him. He wouldn't have tasted the fruit if he knew it would lead to death. Or would he? Again, the Reverend Ditmar argues, might Adam and Eve both be responsible for their choices? Maybe it was really boring being innocent, childlike immortals in a garden that met all their needs except freedom and growth. I think it's just too simplistic to make Eve the villain by claiming that she and Adam, and humanity by extension, could have lived happily ever after in the kindergarten of Eden if the first female had just obeyed Yahweh. Life might have been easier for them, but they would have had to give up so much. Eden would have evolved eventually into a numb, gated community. There would be no deep feeling, no laughter or tears or triumph or disappointment or sensation. The grass would grow high around the tree of knowledge of good and evil until it disappeared from view, for there would be nobody to tend it. But Eve didn't let that happen, and this recognition really makes her the heroine of the story. She was willing to take those first steps towards adulthood, and for this, Unitarian Universalists consider the story of the fall or the Garden of Eden as the one of original blessing, not original sin, original blessing of free will and manifest destiny. Yahweh and the serpent each tell the coddled couple portions of the truth. Yahweh explains that by eating from the tree of good and evil, they will die. He's right. Knowledge issues immortality, although apparently Adam lives to be 930 years old. It's a myth, remember. The serpent fills in the important blanks, and the couple decides to take their chances. You will not die, meaning on that particular day, for God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Not to mention guilt. Such a thing did not exist before the fateful bite. No shame, no guilt, no Jewish mother, stereotypes, or jokes. I can hear it now, echoing through history. It's all right, Cain. I'll just sit here in the dark while you go off to the land of Nod. On this topic, I think I'll leave the dysfunction of the first family for another Sunday. Eve wears at least 3 faces, and if we examine and blend them with clear eyes and care, we can reclaim and esteem her as a role model for all gender identities. Whether she truly exists or not, Eve, as symbol and as metaphor, brought knowledge, curiosity, sensuality, and fullness to humanity. And yes, she ushered in the reality of death, which some would argue motivates a full life in the first place. If we gaze with love and appreciation at her visage, we can detect the angles of mature womanhood, as well as all the challenges of partnership, parenthood, pain, pleasure, pride, and regret. She is the epitome of what the author Chelsea Wakefield calls a luminous woman, one who has archetypal fluency and is not trapped by narrow definitions of herself. We know the challenges, though. In her famous poem, Ain't I a Woman?, Sojourner Truth asks, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down, all alone, together, women ought to be able to turn it right side up again. I can empathize with the poet's frustration, living as she did in a far more repressive time than we encountered today. The last thing I want you to take away from my sermon is for women to unite against men. That isn't what I want. On the contrary, my hope is that all men and women, no matter their gender identity, will unite to construct a balanced portrayal and deep appreciation of all genders as we protect reproductive rights and we protect the right to buy Viagra. My paradisal dream is that men as well as women across the spectrum will be liberated by freeing Adam and Eve from the boxes where they've bumped up against the limits of stereotypes and shame for millennia. We can take back these biblical stories and reshape the meaning of Genesis as the story of human striving, moral freedom, original blessing, and personal responsibility. We can challenge the use of damning and limited spiritual-based paradigms of women in the public arena. We can re-myth Eve as a change agent and say, thank you. We can re-myth Adam as a collaborator and say, you were wise to follow. In the quiet of the garden, we can still hear Eve speaking to us and encouraging us all to lift our faces to the sun. I found God in myself and loved her fiercely. We can hear her saying, I have lived for thousands of years as someone I never was. I have survived, and so must you. Be who you are. Be luminous, be proud, be your own Genesis. Blessed be, blessed we, and amen.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll arise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Just because I walk as if I have oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my sassiness upset you? Don't take it so hard just because I laugh, as if I have gold mines digging in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words, you can cut me with your lies, you can kill me with your hatefulness, but just like life, I'll rise. Does my sexiness offend you? Oh. Does it come as a surprise that I dance as if I have diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain I rise. A black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling and bearing in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear I rise. into a daybreak miraculously clear, I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And so, wow, there I go.
Now is the time for silent meditation.
In gratitude of our many blessings and many needs, this morning's offering for this community will now be received.
What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she wears the crown? What happens when she rules her own body? What happens when she sets the beat? What happens when she bows to nobody? What happens when she stands on her own 2 feet? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she wears the crown? Oh, we rise.
She who has said yes to the power to open the womb has done great things for me. Holy is her name. Her mercy flows from mother to child, from generation to generation, soothing all those who turn to her, remembering her compassion, keeping her promise to a progeny forever.
Mama, Lakshmi, Maya, Dimitriyanna, Kali, Keridum, Hikate, Mama, Lakshmi, Maya, Dimitriyanna, ancient mother, I hear your calling, ancient mother, I hear your
We extinguish the chalice here that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this space. May it guide your way until we are together again.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, yeah. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me, yeah. And I'm feeling